PQ leader, Paul St. Pierre Plamondon, thank you so much for joining us
My
today.
pleasure.
Appreciate it. So we have a lot of ground to cover here.
Let's go.
Let's start with a story that's actually in the news today, and it concerns something that's been in the news generally in Quebec for a while, immigration. The government has come out and said they're looking at cutting their number, which was 50 to 60,000. Your party came out and said, you think that number should be about 35,000. Let's talk about immigration generally. So your number is lower than everybody else's. Why? And who would you exclude and how would it work?
So we have to be careful. The numbers you're talking about is permanent immigration. The topic right now, of course, we have to discuss permanent immigration. I will answer your question. But what I've said clearly last week during our caucus is what has changed since the election of 2022 is that we realize that in terms of housing, the topic of temporary immigration is much more important than permanent immigration. Why? Last year we had around 60,000 permanent immigrants. At the same time, we had 167 new temporary immigrants for a total of 530,000 on the territory. So if you look at housing and you look offer and demand, we built around 30,000 units of housing for 230,000 new persons on the territory. So at that point, you can play with the blocks as much as you want. It just doesn't correspond. It just doesn't fit. And so we need to discuss responsibly, intelligently of that topic, especially the topic of temporary immigration. I have said in the election of 2022 that for permanent immigration, we think that 35,000 corresponds better to our capacity of housing integration in French and public services, a capacity to deliver the services. It is the historical number before Jean Charest raised that figure, saying it would solve the shortage of labor. So that's a lie. There's no correlation between shortage of labor and raising the immigration. It's been done in Ontario and Quebec for the past 30 years, and it's not solved yet. And that's because a person, whether immigrant or not, a person is a worker and a consumer at the same time, and bottom line, it evens up. It is the same proportion. So we think at 35,000, we're in a historical figure that at that time, if you remember, there was no housing crisis. The situation was pretty stable. I said that we would recalculate looking at 2026, the next election, we will restart a new sequence of calculations and through which we will put more emphasis on temporary immigration. So we are in that process right now. And the idea here is not to... I don't think there's moral virtue in raising immigration numbers every year. There's moral virtue in hosting fairly and responsibly every person who becomes a Quebecer. If we are at a point where people who come on the territory have no place to go and become homeless, if we are at a point where we have trouble education-wise, for instance, to create classes and provide fair and quality services in terms of education, that's not ethically or morally responsible. So raising, and that's Trudeau's philosophy, it was really like the Century Initiative. We want 100 million Canadians by 2100. There's no moral virtue to that. There's no economic foundation neither, because the idea that it will solve labor shortage has proven to be incorrect. Economists are now confirming that. And there will always be immigration, and that's fair, that's fine. But we have a responsibility to make sure that people have a roof and have services.